Hello and welcome to our presentation on NITEC's CIO SP4 government-wide acquisition contract. This webinar was presented live before an audience of over 200 participants on Monday, November 30th at noon Eastern Time. And due to circumstances, the way we recorded the video and the way it came out, we started kind of midway through it. And so I wanted to give you a view of the introduction slides, put these in the recording. So we're kind of going to splice this thing together a little bit to give you a full sense of the presentation, and a link to the presentation slides will also be provided in the description along with this video. So my name is Robert Turner, and along with my friends Josh Duvall and Kathy Lentz, we put together a comprehensive presentation, we believe, on the current state of play relative to CIO SP4 and what you can expect with the final RFP, some of the issues that I'm sure the government is working on, and how you can prepare to submit a winning bid starting in late December, early January, when the final RFP comes out. This slide shows you the webinar agenda. I'm going to do a quick introduction of the presenters. I then begin with an overview of the vehicle. My friend Josh Duvall, who is a government contracts attorney, has a very compelling presentation regarding contractor teaming arrangements, what is required, and some of the new SBA regulations that have been put in place that will certainly have an impact on this vehicle. Kathy Lentz, who has several decades of experience capturing business in the federal market and especially within healthcare IT, gives us her perspective on the steps that you need to take to make a final bid decision on this. And then we wrapped up the webinar with a discussion of how you can make productive use of the remainder of this pre-RFP period to get out ahead of things. And then we actually spent the better part of 45 to 50 minutes in some live Q&A at the end of the presentation. And so if you have the time, you may benefit from listening to that. Just briefly, our legal disclaimer here at the bottom of the agenda slide. This is a general informational webinar. We're not providing any specific legal advice. And if you do need that, of course, contact your attorney or one of the very many that are available around the Beltway. And of course, we recommend that you reach out to Josh Duvall. He's just fabulous and also has some very good technical chops as well. So let me introduce my friends. I apologize that this is not part of the live recording, but I think you'll get a sense of everybody's background as you listen to this recording. Again, my name is Robert Turner, and my firm, R. Turner Consulting, we've been in business for 8 years. I personally have 30 years experience in technical sales and marketing, and as a company, we provide full life cycle federal business development, capture, and proposal support. I have a very good team We provide full life cycle federal business development, capture, and proposal support for both large and small business contractors. I have what I think is one of the better teams around the Beltway. Every year we're doing strategic capture for a number of clients. We're doing BD, pipeline management, government and partner introductions. And of course, we write a lot of proposals, and I think we do a very good job, and I think our customers will testify to that. We've got experience winning vehicles of this size, including its predecessor, CIO SP3. We just concluded earlier this year a very successful program with our client base on GSA 8A Stars 3. And as you can see here, I'm building a number of platforms to provide value to the GovCon community and help contractors gain better insight into the market, as well as lower their overall B&P costs. My friend Kathy Lentz, she and I have been working together for a long time. Kathy has many years of experience capturing business within the federal market, and her focus is in the healthcare industries. As she likes to say, she works at the deal level. She has a great capability to be able to help clients of various sizes really understand their competitive position relative to a deal, partner, make connections with the right government contacts, understand what the government really needs, and put together the best winning team and best winning strategy. One of the things that sets Kathy apart from many of us here in the industry is her participation with PSC and HIMSS and her connectivity to many of the decision makers in the government. So reach out to Kathy when you need business development support, especially within the healthcare market. Josh Duvall, as I mentioned, is just a fabulous government contracts attorney. He runs his own firm, Matros Edwards, graduated from George Washington University, and just has spent a lot of effort putting together some real compelling information here, which I'm sure you'll see, and just has fabulous clients. He's CISSP certified and can practice in both Florida, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. I know you'll enjoy getting to know Josh through this webinar and down the road as well. Okay, so let's talk briefly about CIO SP4 from an overview perspective. Set the stage here. Let me cover one or two slides, and then we will cut and go right into the live presentation. Okay, CIO SP4 has a 5-year base and 1 5-year option. And for those task orders that are awarded toward the end of the option period, that could extend well into 15 years. It does have a $40 billion ceiling, which is twice what CIO SP3 has. So we're kind of estimating about $20 billion for the small business contract and about $20 billion for the large business contract. You can see the NAICS code there and the relative small business size standard. We're anticipating, based upon the dates that they've already met, that this bid will release sometime after the mid part of January or mid part of December into the first part of January. And then they have also indicated that proposals will be due sometime in March. So you can expect, if you're going to bid this vehicle, a 60 to maybe 90 days at the outside based on extensions or whatnot, proposal window. And just from our analysis of the RFP, we're going to need every bit of that time to put together compelling bids. You can see over there on the right-hand column the number of expected awards that they're looking at, 75 to 125 on the large business side, and then maybe another 75 to 125, what they're calling mid-tier companies, those under $1 billion, but certainly larger than 30. And then they will have categories of small business awards. And during the proposal process, each of these types, 8A, woman-owned, hub-zone, service-disabled, will be competing for awards within their own classification. So that should certainly have some impact on the competition.
So we do have a 3-phase evaluation that's coming. We also understand that this is not a 3-phase submission process. So all vendors who propose on SP4 will have to submit an entire proposal, but they are planning to evaluate it in phases. Look at the scoring sheets, look at the go, no-go requirements, and then those who pass each gate will then get evaluated further. Evidence of an adequate cost accounting system is something that everybody will have to have. That appears to be a non-negotiable. Things like earned value management systems and other certifications get you additional points, but having a government certified adequate accounting system is required so that you can take cost plus contracts. You can see the phase 3 evaluation factors here: technical capability and understanding, corporate experience, and then you can see the page limits here that we've outlined based on the draft RFP. Another one, kind of our positioning strategies that we've kind of settled on as a team here, is that in order really to maximize your points, it is, we think, in every offeror's best interest to bid on all 10 task areas. So that should be something that we all think about. Your past performance, you will need 3 references, and they have limited you to only 1 from private sector. which would require 2 from a government customer. Pricing, nothing really new about pricing. They're looking for fair, reasonable, and predictable. They put this language in here about what a prudent person would buy. So I thought that was interesting. And then they will be comparing your proposed rates to other proposals and to an independent government estimate. So be prepared for that. And then also be prepared to show them what your methodology is. So you do want to think through how you write your pricing methodology. Okay, news from the Roadshow. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read the slide, you can read the bullets here, and then we will be giving you a copy of this. Of course, the big issue that everybody has is contractor teaming arrangements. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail here in just a few minutes. In terms of what's allowed and how corporate experience will play into this. The scoring sheet we expect to be updated a little bit in the final, so that will give us some guidance in terms of contract value, especially for small business. Brian has said that they expect 400 to 500 total awards, and as I mentioned earlier, the small business offers will be competing within their own pool. I left this topic in here about a mid-tier pool. I think there's that's going to be a problematic thing to get through legal and to come out. Of course, the Small Business Administration doesn't have a category for this, and it'll be interesting to see if the justification for additional points for this mid-tier section actually makes it through, but it's in the current scoring sheet, and so I left it in here. And, you know, kind of look for January through March for your proposal period. That's what we're expecting, and at this point, we believe that they'll keep to some of that. So that's the GWAC overview. I'm sure not a lot of new stuff, but that's kind of our baseline. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Josh Duvall and let him walk through
Before we do that, we have a number of questions about your section. Can we walk through them?
Yeah, let's do that, Kathy. Thank you. Let's do that.
Okay. The first one is, are the self-scoring categories of locations and federal MAS experience limited to such experience delivering relevant information technology support, or can they apply to any experience wherein the offered managed projects outside the requisite 200-mile radius and or manage any type of federal contract?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I've thought through that. I did not see any language, now that I reflect, in the draft RFP that would prohibit, you know, a non-relevant IT project from being applicable there. But that's a great question, and probably something that's worth a clarifier with NITAC, and then also something for us to look at the final about.
Okay, and then there's a number of CTA questions, but we'll let Josh, if you can ask Josh those. And then another question are, the primary question we continue to have is whether an example contract, if used for multiple task areas, will receive scoring for each use, providing the narrative content addresses the task order. For example, if we have contract 1 that covers 2 task areas, and we identify how that contract applies to 3 and 4 as an example, will we receive points for each of the uses, or do we only receive points for the first time we reference the contract?
Yeah, they did specify that in the draft RFP, and you can use a task order more than once across task areas. That is allowable.
Okay. Will any specific accounting system certification be required?
The way I read the final RFP or the draft RFP is that you will need it does need to be certified as adequate by the government. But I think that's a great question to you. I think that's a great topic for clarification now with NITAC, and certainly something that we should all pay attention to as the final.
What is meant by 100 million plus next to mid-tier in slide 8? Are mid-tiers being evaluated separately from large?
Yeah, maybe Kathy will hold that question until your section. I know that we've talked about that before, and that kind of goes to kind of how NITAC's positioning this whole thing. So maybe we'll hold that one for a little bit.
Okay. Are subcontractors required to be DCAA compliant?
There's no specification for that I read. I think it's only the offerer. But that's a great question, and that goes to the nature of the CTA or joint venture that anyone will be proposing. So I think that's another great question to hold on to. I don't know that they've been specific on that. Josh may have an opinion on that.
Will the look back period for past performance be extended to 5 years to align with the look back period of 5 years for small business revenue?
Yeah, I mean, they've specified 3 years so far, so I think that's another great. I think that's another great clarifier. I think we should all submit that issue back to NITAC now, and look to make that an issue as the final comes around. That's a great point. The SBA has set the new rule for a 5 year, that 5 years to establish a size standard. So I think that's a great question.
Is past performance limit per task area or as a whole?
The task area, yeah, past performance is as a whole. 3 references for your entire proposal. It's not done by task area.
And is past performance required to come from CPARs?
It is not. Not that I read from the draft RFP.
Okay. Why is there a threshold of 5 million for corporate experience when the scoring sheet has multiple ranges?
Yeah, so I think that's the minimum for the large business contract. Obviously, the small business goes all the way down to 500,000. So, and this is one of those things that we have to kind of keep working on, right? There's one RFP for both large and small. There's one scoring sheet for both large and small. And so sometimes we kind of, I should have clarified that in the slide that was a large business requirement.
Is the $5 million requirement for a single program award?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I did not see that was as clear as it could be is how you can deal with a collection of task orders. And I think that could use with some more clarity. But yeah, I think we have to look at the dollar threshold at a task order level. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do CIO SP4 applicants need to have a healthcare related past performance or tech experience?
Yeah, they'll need corporate. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the go, no go. That's one of the go, no go requirements. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that slide here. One of the go, no go requirements is one of them is evidence of an adequate cost accounting system. And now that we're back on the slide, it is required of the offer and all members of the CTA. So I think that was a question. And then this health related mission, that's task area 1. And then it's also management sub-factor 1. So you do have to have corporate experience in a health related mission. Now, Kathy, I'll defer to your expertise in terms of how we define a health related mission, but that is one of the go, no go requirements.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I would say, you got to read for task area 1 how they define it. If you can define it like that, then you're good.
Yeah.
I'm just going to allow one more question because we really need to move to the CTA section, and there's a lot of CTA questions that we'll ask after Josh gets done. But one of the questions is, here, we're moving so quickly through these. Let me see, I had it and then it just moved because we have so many. Oh, these are a lot. Oh, this is the last one, and then we're going to move to Josh. If we have a project under the same contract number, but different task orders under the same, can we combine all the years for this? If we have a project under the same contract number, but different task orders under the same, can we combine all the years for this? for example, if we have project X running from 2014, it's under the same contract number, but renewed every year under a new task, or can we combine all the years to meet the dollar threshold for points?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I would say that the draft RFP in its current form doesn't provide any clarity on that. I would still have that question at this point.
Okay. So
Okay.
over to you, Josh. And Robert, there's a lot of CTA questions throughout. You might want to scroll through when you get to his
Yep.
section.
Yep. All right. Good. Good. Thank you, Kathy.
Well, hi, everyone. Glad you've joined us today. Just as a quick note to begin, I think there have been a number of NITAC roadshows and events that have covered this. So there may have been some discussions about what might be included in CTAs or what might NITAC do moving forward. But the information I have right now is based solely on the draft RFP plus a couple of interesting developments with SBA. So if we can go to the next slide. So as many of you know, this is one of those contracts that has tremendous value for small and mid-sized companies, but particularly for small. And throughout the draft RFP, we see a reference to 9601. And when you see the paren 1 next to it, the author of the draft RFP is talking about specifically the joint venture. And then when you see, throughout the, or what will be the final RFP, but for now, for purpose of this, the draft RFP 9601 with the parenthetical 2, they're talking about like a traditional prime subcontractor relationship. So now if we kind of move to the next slide. So a couple things to think about, first of all, the RFP as it stands now provides pretty detailed requirements with respect to what contractors must include in their RFP. And because this is a go, no go criteria, it's critical that contractors pay close attention to that and make sure they're hitting those requirements in addition to whatever requirements are required for a joint venture under Title 13 SBA regs. It appears that, if you cannot make it past these go, no go criteria, you won't even get to an adjectival rate evaluation scheme here. With respect to SBA regulations, there's SBA published a pretty behemoth rule. It was wide-ranging in October. It took effect on November 16th, 2020. So 2 weeks ago, this rule is fresh. It covered a lot of things, including joint ventures, mentor-protege. It obviously, the namesake, consolidated the mentor-protege with the all-small program, but also touched upon facility clearances and pertinent to this webinar today, the capabilities, past performance, and experience for teaming. If we can go to the next slide. And so what we have here, a lot of folks have been seeing and hearing things on the street. Are they going to count subcontractor past performance? I think I saw a question in the chat about all members of a CTA collectively addressing certifications and systems. And so this obviously is quite confusing, I think, for a lot of folks because they want to know how they're going to be evaluated. So let's go to the next slide. This is the old rule here. And I put this up for comparison. Prior to the change that took place 2 weeks ago, we have the rule which required for small business joint ventures, the procuring activity must consider the work done individually by each partner. So this has sort of been interpreted in two ways. One was the fact that this didn't clarify any limitations on whether or not a procuring activity could limit the amount of a mentor's past performance, for example. And secondly, in a different protest, and I believe both of these were OASIS, where the points were sort of apportioned to, the JV had to, the small business had to get all of the business systems. I think there was an ISO certification among others. So now let's switch to the next slide. This is how SBA has sort of addressed this new regulation, which is the same regulation, 13 CFR 125.8E. But now instead of just talking about past performance and experience, the SBA has bolstered this quite substantially to include capabilities. And so what we have here is where an offer is submitting an offer for as a joint venture, the procuring activity must consider the work done and qualifications held previously. And then in the middle that's not highlighted, the procuring activity may not require the protege to individually meet the same evaluation responsibility criteria as that of the other offers generally. But I think this goes to the question in the chat box, the last sentence in bold: the partners of the JV in the aggregate must demonstrate the past performance, experience, business systems, and certifications necessary. And so with this in place, folks should be paying attention when the final RFP comes out to just how NITAC is going to navigate joint venture, past performance, experience, and capabilities, and sort of confirm that what they're saying measures against this new SBA regulation. So this is, I think, pretty big that for folks who are considering, because obviously if you're a small business and you're forming a JV, you may not have all the certifications that a larger your mentor might have, for example, or even a more robust small business. In addition to the joint venture aspect, I think originally, if we went through the draft RFP, there were questions about what type of past performance credit could a teaming member under a 9601 parenthetical 2, which is a prime sub relationship, could use for in terms of point scoring. And the draft RFP was pretty bare bones. It really just said we're going to look to the resources. I'm not sure if anything has changed, but what I can tell you, if we go to the next slide, is with the SBA's regulation change. Next slide, Robert. Oh, here we go. We have a new regulation. So this is 13 CFR 125.2G. This regulation did not exist. This is not a revision of any existing regulation. This is a brand new regulation that SBA created. And this is capabilities, past performance, and experience. And it's facially pretty welcome news, but it also has a little bit of nuance to it. So I think if we just go through it, it says where an offer of a small business prime includes a proposed team of small business subcontractors and identifies those first tier subs in the proposal, the head of the agency must consider, so the agency's got to consider the capabilities, past performance, and experience of each first tier sub that is part of the team as, so in that third line, it says as the capabilities, past performance, and experience of the small business prime. So we're treating this subcontractor's past performance as if it were the primes in the situation where the capabilities, past performance, and experience of a small prime does not independently demonstrate those capabilities necessary for award. So that last caveat is critical, but I think folks should be thinking, even if that weren't true, and the NITAC could very well allow a small business to go beyond this rule, because this is really designed to sort of address a situation where a small doesn't have the past performance. They can then count their first tier subcontractors' past performance as if it were their own, but NITAC would be free to allow a subcontractor's past performance to be included if they want, even where the prime does have that capability. So this sort of fixes a situation that I think has pestered a lot of small businesses where they look at a contract or a solicitation and they don't know how their subcontractor past performance is going to be valued, if at all, or if it's going to be evaluated on some sort of negative weighted regime because they're not the prime. So I think when the final RFP comes out, folks should look to see how NITAC has changed the past performance experience for a 9601-2, which is a prime subcontractor teaming arrangement. And so I think those broadly answer some of the questions. If we go to the next slide, in terms of looking forward, again, I think it's important to closely scrutinize the final RFP. In these situations, we want to make sure that not only the RFP, comports with these new regs, which, as I mentioned earlier, took effect November 16th, so just 2 weeks ago, but also, use it as an opportunity to clarify any lingering questions about past performance. I know we have the question about certifications and business systems. That might be something worth fleshing out in a Q&A if it's not clear in the RFP. And lastly, for folks, this is a big enough procurement. I think you might end up seeing some either agency level or GAO pre-award protest to sort of, get NITAC to commit where there are ambiguous language or unreasonable terms, or if the solicitation somehow deviates from any of these rules that I've discussed here or others. You know, for a little bit more on that, I did post an article this morning on my blog, so I put that right there on the bottom of the slide. But that sort of covers this. I think this is a pretty substantial change from what I had heard, at least from what I've read from the draft RFP, but what I've been hearing throughout industry over the summer is how are they going to take care of past performance for JVs as well, and the prime sub issue, which seemed to be frustrating to most because it sort of put them in a situation where they were going to need to form a joint venture in order to add the past experience that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to get by forming a prime sub. So with that, I think I looks like I've seen a bunch of questions sort of come in. I think we can try to answer as many as we can here.
Yeah, I mean, at least one of the questions, Josh, was does a CTA have to be a legally incorporated company, or can you create the teaming arrangement between the members and submit a proposal without incorporating as a new company?
So if we're talking about a joint venture, most folks that form a JV just create a separate LLC in order to obtain the protections of the Limited Liability Company Act from whichever state they're in. Teaming arrangements, so the second CTA, that's typically just a teaming agreement that folks sort of go after, because in that situation, the prime contractor is the one that is in privity of contract with the government. So there isn't a different legal entity. And so I hope that answers the question there. I know it can be confusing, but when we're talking about CTAs, we're talking about either the joint venture or a prime sub relationship.
Yeah. I mean, based upon what you've read too, I mean, do you anticipate a large number of protests, or maybe just a few, Josh, at this point?
It's hard to say. You know, when we're talking about pre-award challenges, so we're challenging terms of the solicitation, it's either something that is restricting competition or it's ambiguous. Unfortunately, you know, once an ambiguous term is sort of baked in and you've submitted your proposal, you can't then, you know, cry foul if you don't, you know, make the cut, so to speak. And so folks really need to consider their options here. I imagine there's going to be a significant number of Q&As which will be incorporated into the terms of the final version of the RFP. I would imagine that there's no reason why they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But in the event that, you know, NITAC decides to punt or their answer isn't as clear as someone would want, you know, when you're talking about a 10 or potentially 15-year GWAC, if you get a task on the last day of the last option period, you know, it's important to get it right to begin with. So while it's hard to say how many, I think folks are going to be paying attention, and this is going to be something that's going to get ironed out from industry, because everyone involved here is going to have a vested interest in ensuring that these issues are as clear as they can be heading into proposal submission.
Right, 100%. So another one of the issues that, excuse me, came up in the question chat was this idea of a joint venture or a CTA that was formed for the express purpose of bidding this particular contract, CIO SP4. Brian has said he doesn't want that, that he wants CTAs that have worked together previously. But as you've said several times, Josh, you know, CTAs have a finite lifespan. So those two concepts seem to be in conflict or in tension with one another.
Yeah, so as many folks are aware, you know, what used to be the 3 and 2 rule is no longer. Now it's just the 2 rule. So you can have as many contracts as you want in a 2-year period, but you still have the duration of the JV. And because of that, it's hard to, you know, to have the joint venture entity have its own past performance, because typically you're drafting the JV agreement for a particular contract. But you know, this is, I think, goes to the discretion of the agency, and this could completely get changed in a protest if GAO thinks it's unreasonably restricting competition. But to say that you have to have worked in the past, I think they're guarding against, you know, prior iterations. So the CIO SP3, for example, where there may have been issues between teaming partners. I think their NITAC's thinking now as well, to avoid that problem for CIO SP4, let's just say that they've got to have work, they must have worked together in the past, so we know that they at least have some sort of relationship. But how that changes during the final RFP, I imagine there will be a lot of Q&As with respect to that. If it is ambiguous in the I mean, if someone's proposing a joint venture and they've worked together, they might be in a better advantage than someone who, hasn't. So that I imagine we'll see a lot of activity with that again.
Well, right, and in at least half of those situations, if it was a prime sub relationship and they work together, then the prime has all that corporate experience anyway, and so why do they need that subcontractor on this particular deal? So I mean, notwithstanding Brian's desire that companies show that they work together, just the very nature of requiring that in a teaming arrangement creates its own level of problems that I think are going to need to get ironed out as we get closer to the final. Let's look at some of these other questions, Josh, before we move on to the next section. And I want to give us some time kind of at the end.
Yeah,
question. Yeah, there's a third type of CTA. Yeah, this GSA CTA really, Patricia, really wouldn't qualify because this is not a GSA schedule. So we're back to the more traditional ones. Can the prime use a subcontractor socioeconomic certifications to bid on multiple SMB categories? And I think the answer to that would be no. The prime will need to have will need to be in those socioeconomic categories to be able to qualify.
Yeah, these are a lot of good questions here. For Patricia's point, yes. I mean, that is a completely separate issue because GSA has their own thing with
Right, federal supply schedule.
Each contractor in that experience, they have their own contract with GSA. So that's sort of like a separate thing. But what we're talking about for purposes of here is FAR 9601 1 and 2, which covers the typical joint venture agreement between either a protege and its mentor or two small businesses who each qualify as small under the NAICS code.
Right. So Bob brings up, Bob Strom, that was a great question. I appreciate that. And this brings up a good point in terms of forming a CTA or a joint venture. And his question is this: in a woman-owned small business bid, are all CTA members required to be woman-owned small businesses? So which kind of gets to how the joint venture gets classified in socioeconomic preference.
So under SBA's rules, the lead venturer, the managing venturer, is the entity to which the socioeconomic designation rests. So if you're a SDVOSB and you want to set up a SDVOSB joint venture, then that is that would be the designation of the overarching JV. Now, SBA's rule that they just published was 220 pages, and I don't know if there's a specific carve out or an exception for women-owned small businesses. But if we're talking about a joint venture, the lead woman-owned company needs to be certified. So it's no longer self-certification. There's a third-party regime in place as of, I believe, October 15th. They would need to have that in place in order to qualify the JV as for woman-owned tasks under the GWAC.
And so just one of the key takeaways from this whole section, Josh, that we talked about last week as we were preparing these slides, is that this new SBA rule really is in conflict with much of kind of how the draft RFP is constructed, some of what we've heard out of NITAC, and this prohibition from using subcontractor corporate experience and past performance to build up qualifications for the bid. right? So these two things, so it's really, it's not, you know, not to say that we're just pointing out more fog, but these things are in conflict with one another, right? And so it brings up issues that are going to need to be resolved as the final RFP comes about.
Yeah, so we have a draft RFP, and that's all we have to go off of, and that was published, I believe, in March. So these rules, again, the ones that I specifically mentioned, and there are others that will have an impact on the small business community as a whole. The NITAC will have to think about how they want to structure the final RFP, taking into consideration not only the change to the joint venture rule, which, as I mentioned, is a revision of an existing rule, but also take into consideration a brand new rule that didn't exist prior to, you know, the effective date, right, which is November 16th, with respect to the capabilities, past performance, and experience of a small business prime's first tier subcontractor in the event where that small prime does not have that capability, past performance, or experience necessary for award on its own. So as I mentioned, the rule is subject to, I think, a couple of interpretations. But when folks are, you know, because this is going to be a thing that drives decision making moving forward. Do I form a joint venture, or can I bid this as a prime sub? What are my options? How am I going to be evaluated? What will how can I get the most points to ensure that I'm within the cutoff? Because I think, you know, NITAC, unless they're going to make another change, has kind of said, look, there's going to be a couple hundred, small business bids. There's going to be 25 to 75, I think it was, 8As, and we'll have some folks that are other than small. And so, you know, there's going to be some calculated decision making here to determine whether or not a company should just prime sub it or form a JV. And so when the rule comes out, you know, go back to the SBA's rule, or when the RFP comes out, go back to the SBA's rule and see how it comports. And if there's any lingering doubt, obviously utilize the Q&As. And if after the Q&A process, there's still questions or concerns, I imagine there will be folks willing to challenge that just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, because everyone wants to be evaluated even handily.
Right.
No one wants to have an upper edge. And so there's that.
Well, and so this goes to Emily, as well as some other folks have asked this question about, can a business use a first tier subcontractor's past performance or corporate capability to meet either task area 1 or any other requirement in the RFP? And I think, as we've kind of brought up, this is an open issue. And I think they're going to have a lot of, they've got to reconcile this, because if they stick to their guns, then they're essentially requiring everybody form some kind of joint venture. But then, do I have to have worked with them, which brings up problems? Or is NITAC saying just prime contractors are going to be acceptable? But then, how many small business prime contractors can really address all 10 task areas? That's a problem. How do they deal with this SBA rule? And so there's just a lot of issues, which I think will open up a number of opportunities. And so I think actually this is a good jumping off point for Kathy's section. Kathy, as we start talking about how you evaluate your current position, prepare for the final, and make a final bid decision. So you want to jump into this section?
And just one real quick before Kathy goes off, I know I got another question. I'll have to check the SBA's regulations to definitively answer the question about the women-owned small business issue. Typically, if two small business form a JV, then the JV falls underneath the exception to affiliation. I don't have that rule in front of me. I don't know if there's a sentence in there that says both of the small entities need to be of the same socioeconomic class in order for that to check. So I can look at that, but I just want to mention that before Kathy takes off. So there you go.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks, Josh.
We'll follow up.
Yeah, thanks. And Josh, one last thing I saw came up a couple of times. If for some reason in the final RFP, they do decide to let the CTAs and the prime subs go to their partners or subs for corporate experience at the small level, could they then say, okay, if you're a small business, you can do that, but you larges, your CTAs, you're still only going to be allowed to lead? Could they do a split like that?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So we're talking about small business, prime subs, small business, CTAs are these new rules. Let's say they go in the direction of allowing then corporate experience to come from your teammates or your CTA partners now. And let's say they go that direction, that a decision they make. Then on the large side, there's going to be CTAs for on the unrestricted side. If they say on the small side, yes, your partners can still count, your subs can count, would they then have to, on the large side, say now the same has to apply there? Or could they split and say, no, over there, nope, your CTA's got to be the lead. Your CTA, your prime subs have to be the prime, subs don't count. Could they do two separate like that?
I would think so. I mean, the rules that I was talking about previously are for small business programs. So where small business is concerned, these rules control. Unrestricted is a different ballgame. Now, whether or not NITAC wants to keep the rules the same, or say, look, if you're bidding unrestricted, you've got to be able to hit all 10 categories on your own, or else you're ineligible. That I believe they can do that, because there isn't a rule. As I mentioned, the SBA's rules don't apply to large businesses; they apply to small.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just so everybody knows, there are a lot of questions in the chat. You have our emails at the end. If you do not get your question answered, please feel free on the section you're asking questions about to reach out directly, and we will respond to your questions the best we can. So next, before you go forward, I think there's a lot of what's happening, what's going on. There's so many changes. Before you get started, because this is going to be a very difficult contract vehicle to pursue, because there's going to be a long award delays due to protests, and they're expecting over 1,000 bidders. So you really need to think about, do I really need to compete in this federal government world? Do I need this contract? And a perfect example of the rationale why you might really want to rethink bidding this is because on CIO SP4 small ramp-on, that award or that request came out in, or solicitation came out in March of 2016. And here we are 4 years and 8 months later, and they still haven't awarded it. It's because there was a protest of the small business awards. They were the last one to award. And then the protest got denied for some reason, and then that company protested again. So by the time these guys get their award, even though it came out halfway through, they're going to have 1 year left on this contract. So it's really something that you really need to think about. And NITAC has said it's 50-50 whether we're going to allow ramp-on. So just know that if you don't bid now, 5 years from now, there may be no ramp-on. And it's because of that example I just gave you that's been very frustrating. One of the things that you can do is you can really look at the awards database. If you know any prime, and I'm sure you've got somebody that there's so many primes, hundreds of them. If you can take a look at the awards database, there's an actual report that you can pull down and you can see, is my work on there? I had one client of the 1,500 awards on there, they only had 2 to 3 tasks. I said, on those 2 to 3 tasks, can you pull them to some other best-in-class vehicle you have? Then do that. Don't figure that it's going to be on CIO SP4 because of this delay, because of how long it takes to award this. It might go past the expiration date, and the customer is going to have to consider another contract vehicle. Next slide. So just so you understand the decision makers here and what you can do, Brian Goodger is the acting, he's hoping for a January hire, lead for NITAC, director of NITAC. He's also the associate director for OLEO. And the problem with that is OLEO is responsible for Project Warp Speed, which is the acquisition of vaccines. And as we all know, that's coming very quickly. So really, for pre-RFP, maybe there's some influence there. And of course, you know, he's been out in all the forums. He's the ones talking. And there's his contact information. I would reach out to him now, because as we get closer to the vaccine release and as we get closer to the RFP and to him hiring somebody else, he's not going to be available. Keith Johnson, who is the CIO SP program manager today, he's focused on getting the CIO SP3 small ramp on, because it's under protest. He's saying now that they're hoping in, well, right now, it used to be, he was hoping November 1st, but with this recent re-protest, they're thinking January now. So he's focused there, and he has warned in his NITAC CIO SP3 program manager meetings that, you know, you're hearing a lot in these open forums what's in the final RFP. And yes, I see a lot of frustration in the web chat. They haven't been giving us another draft RFP, and it's a problem. You can't count on anything. And you can see right now, they threw up this idea of having, you know, extra points for mid-tier, and they had to throw that out. Legal threw that out. Now they're in the process of trying to put forward a whole new category for mid-tier, and how they defined 100 to 500 million. I mean, when they ask, well, what do you consider under 100 million? Well, that's a small business. That's in direct conflict to how SBA defines small business. So in reality, you've got to be really careful there. So your messaging, look at the RFP, focus on the points in what your issues are, and focus on bidding burden, because a lot of his decisions that he's making, Brian's making, it's the burden. Like they don't have the staff to do all these things. When he keeps talking about I'm going to be looking for people and you have 9,000 above points, you know, and A score or whatever, you know, 90 to 100, whatever he says at whatever time, it has a lot to do with they don't have the ability to deal with so many awards, so they're trying to reduce it. And then the other thing too is very early in the summer, he spoke about the possibility when a question came up of just having you do the scoring sheet. Since it's going to be a down select, why are you putting people through the whole RFP process when if you're going to use the down select, just ask for the scoring sheet. You're not going to be validating the scoring sheet in phase one anyway, so you don't need the other documentation to do that. So that's one of the things you may talk about. You can also look at, and I had the next slide that we've actually broken down the awards for you. And one of the things you might want to look at is, you know, look at this sheet. Under 2 million, 33% of their bids are under 2 million, and it gets the least amount of points. So is that a message we don't care about those opportunities? It's because you're giving them less points. So having discussions with him, I don't know if anyone's ever broken this down and showed it to him and said, Brian, what is your message here? Why would you say to customers, if your bids are under 3 million, they're not as important to us? Because guess what? When Congress passes acts and they come over as programs, many times they come as pilots, which are very, very small. Those become huge O&M contracts, but if they don't start out with you, they're not going to end at the O&M phase with you. So that's another area. And then, of course, the SBA regulations that we just spoke about, how are they going to influence how he's going forward? Not only on the small side, but are you going to make it equal on the large side as far as how CTAs are going to be allowed and prime subs are going to be allowed to utilize for points category their corporate experience. Next slide. So this is a changing landscape, how they're going to score it. There's no instructions. Brian said at a NITAC PM meeting in October that they were going to have instructions with the last scoring sheet version number 4. They never came out. There's been a whole bunch of discussions about historically Black colleges and universities, and if you look at that executive order, it allows you to use many things like lending them equipment and hiring them and things like that. But Brian has said, nope, I'm just going to allow you be able to count that if you have contracts and grants with them. So there's issues there. One of the things I think is most important for you to do, you definitely need to bid all 10 task areas. And then, because here's the issue. If you don't bid all 10 task areas and you go after a deal, let's say I'll give you an example of a client I have that didn't bid task area 4, or they bid it, but they didn't use the words that were there. They had their own. So NITAC couldn't explain, you know, say you have this because you didn't use my words. if you don't bid task area example 4 and an RFP comes out and it's perfect for you, but somebody behind the scenes, your competitor, has said, you know, I don't want them to bid, so I'm going to convince the contracting officer they need to put task area 4 in there. Not only can you not bid it, you can't even see the RFP. You'll know it came out, but that's for teaming purposes, but you will not know what's there or have the opportunity to prime on that. So that's really important. And think about it. I mean, these categories are defined with bullets. You need to, and you work with your proposal shop about making sure you describe them using their words. But, you know, there's a lot of different ways to explain these capabilities. So not only thinking about, have I done this, but getting back to your project teams and saying, hey, have we done this anywhere? Because a project might have started out in task 2, but then all of a sudden it's added task 3, 4, and 5, and you might not know about that. The other thing is that, you know, you hope that these SBA rules will be able to allow you to actually use your partner's corporate experience, and we'll have to see that. So obviously the final RFP, you can't count on anything, but be prepared for that. Next slide. So what do you do now? CTAs, prime sud, it's all in flux. And I found many companies were starting to think about using partnerships to get corporate experience. And then Brian came out with a very definitive, we're only going to allow the lead. So with these new SBA rules that could change this greatly, what I recommend you do is not just say, okay, I'm not going to have a CTA now because what good do my partners bring me? They don't bring me any corporate experience, which equals points. Keep those CTAs in, you know, get them locked down, but put a caveat in there that if the RFP shows up and it doesn't allow you to use your corporate experience, that this CTA is null and void. But you do want to think about, you know, getting those solidified. Also, the other thing is that try to get on as many teams as you can. I know people say, well, it doesn't really count, especially the large, it doesn't really count. So why would any company want me on? The large companies for sure bring on partners, and the small companies, if they're thinking forward, get you on too. Because if you look at that awards report and you see an RFP coming out for recompete in 4 to 5 years, you know the key partners, or can find out the key partners you want on board. Bring them on board now, lock them down now for that future opportunity. Because if you don't do that, you might lose out on being able to partner with them. And also, you'll hear companies say, oh, just get on a team after. That doesn't work. Many companies are like, why should I bring you on now? You didn't help me with this proposal. And so what happens down the road is they'll say, well, you can get on my vehicle if you bring me work. Well, why would I bring you work? You want to be on a vehicle so you can see the sources sought, the RFIs, all of those things that you won't have access to. And then finally, you know, there's a lot of questions in here, I think, about, you know, what should I do? Should I not do? Make sure that when that RFP comes out, that you question everything that has to do, because I'll give you a perfect example, and this will be my last example before we move on CIO, on STARS 3. There's a big brouhaha on STARS 3 this last summer, because what happened is you had these companies that were on STARS 2 that couldn't bid there anymore because they had, you know, sorted out of that category. And the RFP said, you can't prime sub. So they couldn't subcontract. So what happened is they said, well, I'm going to JV. Well, guess what? They said, you can't JV. Well, that made no sense, because here I am, a very successful STARS 2 prime, and now I can't participate in STARS 3. So what happened? After the RFP release, they allowed subbing to happen because of that circumstance. So also be aware that when you look at the RFP, you go, I'm not sure I want to bid this. There could be changes in that Q&A and amendments after that then allow you to play.
Yeah, and Kathy, I think that STARS 3 example is very pertinent because there's a lot of similarities, right? Big GWAC, big government IT vehicle, lots of bidders, lots of interest, and just almost no way for GSA to like lock it down that tightly. And you know, those are just good indicators of at least the kind of pushback and feedback that NITAC's going to get on this whole thing if they really stick to their guns and try and put people in a very small box. So Okay, well, thank you, Kathy. That was great. Let's talk briefly. I know we're right up against our 30 minutes or our 60-minute window here, so I'll be as brief as I can. Let's just talk about what you can do now based on everything we've learned and everything we know to kind of get prepared for this and make good use of the time that we have before the final RFP. I'm not going to go through all these in detail. You'll get a copy of these slides, and some of these are obvious. You know, start qualifying your corporate experience, get a good understanding of where you are and where you need help. And then based upon that, start reaching out to your friends in industry, start making some new friends now if you need them. Certainly Kathy or I could help you with any of that, but start building those bridges to companies that can help you qualify for more task areas. They can be on your team, you can be on their team. There are no limitations that we know of for cross-teaming. You just can't submit more than one prime bid is our understanding. So start making those relationships, and then, you know, based on how the final RFP will come out, will determine how you ink those final agreements in terms of JV, CTA, or whatever. Leading edge technology is ill-defined or not defined at all in the draft RFP. So, you know, I would look to Alliant 2 and some of the other places where those terms are used to try and get a sense of what you can do there. And then really look at your multiple award contracts. There's a lot of points there. Figure out what three past performance things you want to use. You can start pulling those together, and then map your contract performance to the statement of work. You know, and I would really take the time to do this. I've seen a lot of clients that kind of do this on the back of a napkin without really unpacking the text of your statement of work and really looking for nuggets. It doesn't take a lot to qualify for a particular task area if the language is in the statement of work. And so really work on mapping your scope of your contracts to the statement of work so that you can find as many task areas as you qualify for. I'm going to send everyone a copy of the scoring sheet that we developed. We took the government's rules and we blew it out and created a row for every element with scoring so that you can get a good sense of where your score is. You can see here how the 10,000 points break out by corporate experience task area, leading edge, a lot of good points here. I mean, 600 points each. That's you know, that's worth 4 corporate experience references. So really try and find your leading edge experience qualifiers. Also a lot of good points in terms of multiple award contracts. Some good points for location, and then your company qualifications will also contribute. So here's where your 10,000 points come from, and the scoring sheet that I'll give you will help you start working that. So do that now. Also start solutioning for your task areas. As Kathy mentioned, and I think I mentioned as well, you're really going to want to bid all 10. So I would make plans on bidding all 10. Don't just bid the minimums. Shoot for putting a proposal against all 10. And then start your solutioning for all 10. There is a section of the RFP, and I forget if it's section L or M, that cautions against using commercially available proposal templates. So I take that to mean that they're really looking for your solution answers for each task area. Excuse me. So start working on that now. You don't want to phone this in. It'd be a shame to have good corporate experience and then lose evaluation, and they're really adjectival, you know, kind of color bar scoring for your technical areas. So don't phone this in. Work on this, understanding the work, methodology and approach, and then tie your solution to the text of how they define that task area. Use their words as much as possible, while, you know, keeping in mind that some of these task area definitions are a couple of decades old. You know, not uncommon for the government to reuse RFP language. But of course, you know, the IT industry hasn't been static for 20 years. So you kind of have to ride the fence and do both. You can't just talk about the new, you also have to talk about the old. and then realize that you've got 4 pages per task area, and at least half of that is mapping your corporate experience to that solution area. So you've got to be concise, you've got to get to the point, you know, everyone knows that this type of proposal writing takes a little bit of work and revision to really distill it down till you get the gold and the nuggets kind of come out. So those are some things that you can do now. It's 5 minutes past 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedule post Thanksgiving to join us. We're really pleased with all the questions that we've gotten. And I think at this point can kind of hang around if folks want to stay and we can talk about some questions. And I think it's safe now that we've gotten through all the slides. If you want to come off mute and have some Q&A and have some discussion with us, Kathy and Josh, I think we're all willing to hang around for a little bit and create some little friendly discussion.
Absolutely happy to stay on board.
Anybody have any stuff that you'd like us to address here at this point, especially regarding JVs and CTAs?
So one of the questions I saw in the chat, I think it was asked a couple of times. In SBA's new rule, again, effective November 16th, they also made a significant change to facility clearance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy from the rule into the chat so you guys can see it.
Great.
But this is what the rule says, and it basically solves the problem of a JV itself not having the clearance. Now, I don't know how, you know, look, the DCSA is the one that is in charge of these things, and they have the NISPOM manual that says the entity that wins the contract has to have the clearance. But I think SBA is trying to help small businesses out. And what they've said is a JV may be awarded a contract where either the JV itself or the individual partners have the clearance. But then they go on to say where the facility clearance is required to perform the primary and vital requirements of a contract, the lead small business partner must possess it. And then where the facility portion of the contract requiring clearance is ancillary, the partner to the JV that will perform that work has to have the clearance. So I think this is a big change for folks who are bidding JVs on not only CIO SP4, but for other contracts and IDIQs and the like. How this pans out in practice, hopefully it's welcome news, but I imagine there may be, you never know. With DOD, they might take issue with it, but
yeah,
I don't want to speculate on that here. But I think that should be helpful, I think, for those of you who asked the facility clearance questions. And then I'll just put it at the very top. It's in the Federal Register. It's 85 Federal Register. 85 Federal Register.
Yeah, so that's good. We put that in there, Josh. That's good. Michelle Torbert asked about how will they validate written references. My understanding is that they're going to be looking for copies of the statement of work and the FPDS reports to validate both contract size, contract type, and then the pages out of the SOW, much like we did on STARS 3. If anybody participated on STARS 3 or Alliant, any of the other GSA GWACs, where they want you to do Adobe PDF annotations and comments. That's what we're anticipating. Now, that's not written, but that's what we've heard as far as the road shows and the discussions that have happened over the years.
Hey, sorry to cut you off. I was on a meeting 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where Brian was speaking, and that question was asked, and he said your proof is going to come from your 4-page write-up.
Okay.
Because someone asked if we're going to have to do that, and he said, no, your proof's coming from your write-up, and you have to show that you had that past performance. So it's almost like they're taking your word for it. That might change, but that's what he said.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Aaron. That's great.
I had a question. I had a question that wasn't addressed.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting is my capture team, we've been trying to do our own self-scoring, the qualification that you mentioned. And if you look at certain areas, task area 1 is a good example. Beside the broad definition, there are 22, I forget the exact number of bullet points, right? Of what the RFP calls sample work within that task area, right? So, so think about that for a second, and also think about, I'm not sure they have completely defined what will constitute a corporate example. Can I use a large scale PWS from a master agreement, or does it have to be a specific task order? And if it has to be specific task order, then how many of those bullet points, you know, again, getting back to the 20 to 22, would I have to be able to demonstrate in order to declare victory and score the, you know, the full point total? Is that clear? Has anyone thought about that?
Well, I think that Brian has said the word majority. You need to cover the majority of the bullets under that task area. So if 51 is majority, then that's majority. But the key thing I think you've got to be careful about is when you write these up, you need to use their words. Think about the people that are sitting here, contracting officers reviewing this. They're going to not know that one word means another word. So you got to use their words. And again, it's not in the RFP yet. It's what Brian has said. So you got to wait to the final RFP, but the majority of the bullets.
Well, we have been not only using their words, we're actually looking for their words in our PWSs, right? That we are looking to qualify. And I'll just tell you this, that's not easy a lot of times, especially for those areas that have lots of those little bullets. And especially if you can only use a funded task order as opposed to a master agreement. So I'm kind of waiting to see how that's going to play out in the final RFP.
Right, and I'll give you a perfect example. On CIO SP4, a lot of companies were like, well, we don't do imaging. You know, how can we say we do imaging? I go, do you have a Xerox machine? Seriously, do you have a Xerox machine? You don't say Xerox machine, you use their words, but you're imaging every time you do that on these projects. So, I mean, I know that sounds like what, but it's true. You got to figure out I think that when you're looking at these different areas, if you've got an expert in your company who knows the words that are used around this, don't just use their words to search, where have we done this? Ask those experts to talk to the project managers to say, have we done this type of work? Which in their mind, as a customer, they might have named it something totally different than how NITAC does in that task area.
Okay, so I do have a quick question. So when the government talks about the past performance, are they generally referring to having at least 1 year? Could we utilize contracts that just with 3 months of experience as the relevant past performance?
Yeah, I don't remember. I need to pull up that section of the draft in section L. I don't remember what they said about that. It's very typical for them to specify a minimum performance period. And you know, this is where I think they limit themselves by only having one RFP. They haven't split it in terms of the small business contract and the large business contract. They put it all within one document. And that's a good question. I don't think they've clarified it.
I don't think they put anything on the minimum, so I'm just curious, because in some cases, in some of the GWACs they allowed, so yeah, I don't think they specified what's a minimum requirement.
Yeah, and that's part of the risk that's part of the difficulty we have in that, we're dealing with a draft. It still talks about TBD. It still talks about passport. Talks about this attachment J4 we don't have. And there's no minimum. They do throw in here this size, scope, and complexity results achieved, but they don't specify a minimum. So we're just going to have to wait and see. And I think, as we all know, part of the big challenge is that we've
I mean, how many roadshow, how many of these discussion meetings have we had so far, Kathy? You know, a bunch, right? Several?
Bunch.
A bunch, right? So,
And
I mean,
they're contradictory. And one, he says one thing and something else, he says the exact opposite. So it's
Yeah.
difficult. That's why you
Yeah.
hear, you know, hey, wait to see the file. By the way, can you pull up the next page because so they can see that they are going to have all of our emails?
Yeah,
Okay,
you
cool.
bet. You bet. Thanks.
Kathy and Robert, hi, this is Antoinette Williams. Hi.
Hey, Antoinette.
So this whole issue of the road shows, right? I guess this is my commentary real quickly. The whole issue of the road shows is challenging. And yes, there's a lot of conflicting information and there's a lot of make it up as you go. And a lot of it is a direct conflict with what the regs say, right? But this whole notion of working together previously, right? Which is really scary. When you look at the fact that there's no definition around that, right? What does that mean? I mean, how have you worked together? How can you prove that you've worked together? Is this on a task order? Is there a dollar limit? You know, am I talking about my current CIO SP4 partners and we won all 10 task orders? I mean, we worked together to win that and we worked together to review it, right? And Kathy summed that up in a huge way earlier, right, about the activities. So that whole thing right there is just crazy. I don't know. I don't know how that'll play out. Any thoughts about, I mean, what do you think, Kathy?
Well, the CTA new language is going to change all that. But just to tell you where it's coming from, on CIO SP4, they've gotten a lot of customer complaints because you said that you do, ERP and it's really not you, it's your partner that did it. So what threw us all for a loop is when Brian said, oh, well, you can't use that corporate experience if you, the prime, haven't done it.
Right.
And we're like, well, what do you need the partner for? Because we're bringing on partners to qualify for the points in the corporate experience, but that's where it's coming from.
Well,
And it just goes against
the interesting thing about that comment is they award it that way. So, you don't get to change the rules after you've awarded that way. I'm sorry, who was saying what? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Antoinette, it's Robert. I was just saying, notwithstanding Brian's desire about how he wants contract performance to proceed and how he'd like to see his vendor community, I mean, his desire, it's very hard to put those things, to codify those things into RFP language.
Right.
Very difficult.
That's my concern.
I think he's going to lose.
And then have to stand up.
He's going to lose on much of this stuff because it just, I mean, show me a 10, 15, show me a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, $30 million small business that by themselves has complete coverage of all 10 task areas at the level with the majority of bullets and blah, it just doesn't exist, right? That's not small business GovCon. So, I mean, I know it's what he wants and I appreciate that, but you're bidding, you're looking for, 200 to 250 vendors to have contract positions on a $20 billion GWAC. You can't exclude everybody from participating. He's going to get, I think the political pushback is just going to overwhelm NITAC. They're not going to be able to survive.
I think you're right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Robert, Steve, a quick question.
Hey, Steve.
Thanks for doing this thing. It was very informative. So, if you're going as a lone single company, and then can you do a JV and go as two, or you're only allowed to prime as one?
I think that's going to be prohibited. I think if you have a if you bid as a joint venture, then you bid as a joint venture. To bid as a JV and a prime, Josh, you have an opinion on that? Do we think that will be allowable, or is that going to have problems?
I thought, based on what NITAC was saying, as within the last 2 months, I think, was that if you are bidding as a joint venture, as a member to a JV, you cannot also bid independently as a prime. Whether or not that changes or gets challenged is another issue. But I think their NITAC's thinking is, if you can do the work on your own, why do you need to form a JV?
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of folks, or at least some of the larger companies, because you might have a large company or a very mid-sized company that wants to be the they might have multiple proteges and they're the mentor. Are they still going to be able to bid all three? So I think a lot of those questions will get flushed out. Another question I think some folks have been asking is, well, how many, members of a CTA can I have in terms of a joint venture? Most JVs that I've seen, it's typically 2 companies, but I've seen joint ventures with 3 and 4 companies. The issue is that all the JV members individually need to be small. And then there's the other thing to think about. SBA's rule, which I think reiterated a technical correction that SBA had made, which was a longstanding SBA rule interpreted by OHA, was if you win a contract, you're small for the life of the contract. And if it's a GWAC and you become other than small, you can still win orders after the 5th year, but they just don't count against the small business goals. Well, that's no longer the course. SBA's rule says you're no longer an eligible small business. So then now you've got the issue of, well, what if one JV member becomes other than small? Now, do they have to get replaced? Because technically the JV is not full of all small businesses. And if at the 5th year recertification, is that the 8A would presumably, or any small business would presumably be ineligible to compete, which is a huge change from the previous rule. I mean, now you got folks who are trying to think about how to navigate that in terms of, maintaining their status, just to be able to, hit the last 5 plus, maybe, 10 years if you win, you can win a task order at the last minute. So, the logistics of having more partners makes it a little bit more complicated, but under SBA's rules, 13 CFR 121.103 says, how does SBA determine affiliation? And if you scroll down to H, it says H3 says exception to affiliation for certain joint ventures. And so 1 is a JV of 2 or more business concerns may sit and offer as a JV, so long as each concern is small under the size standard. The second one is 2 firms approved by SBA as a mentor and a protege may submit a JV, right? So that's things that you're going to have to deal with. Isn't just hitting the past performance issues, but also thinking ahead. Obviously, I don't think folks need to worry about that now, but it's something that is going to be creeping up on folks in, towards the end of the decade, I guess. If they
that's a great that's a great point, Josh, because it'd be natural to bring on a larger small business, somebody in the $20 to $30 million size range to fill out your past performance. Well, but then that could compromise your JV's ability to be granted the option period, right? So, those are great points, which kind of goes to, this whole idea that NITAC may not get what they want. It just gets to be too complicated.
Yeah, and I've actually seen JVs as large as 10 companies or more over in VA for an SDVOSB. So typically they're that low, but there's been much larger ones have been utilized.
So can you, in an 8A JV, do you have to have everybody 8A? If you're going after 8A, the count, the wins of the slots?
Well, so if you're submitting a joint venture as an 8A, you can either have a mentor protege JV, in which case the mentor company isn't an 8A. But if you're submitting a joint venture, if we go back to SBA's regulation, then all the concerns need to be small. Unless there was another, as I mentioned, the rule is like 200 pages. So unless there's another change to 8A JVs, as far as I know, not every member needs to be an 8A. The lead managing venture needs to be an 8A company.
Okay, that helps.
I'm not talking, and I'm not talking about tribally owned or Alaska Native company. I'm not talking about any of those designations. But
so
at the end of the day,
yeah, go ahead. What happens if it's a prime and sub, right? Switching gears on that. If it's a sub has the task area 1, not the prime, how do they deal with that? Is that only prime must have task area 1 going over?
So I guess 2 things. So the rule that I mentioned earlier, let me take a step back. So the only rule that we have is the joint venture rule. That rule was revised. The teaming rule is a brand new rule, but it uses very similar language, which is that they must consider. Last year, there was a protest. It was a CAGRA Partners. And that was a situation where GAO invited SBA to comment on 125.8E, which is the joint venture rule that recently changed. And what they came to the conclusion was section 125.8E means that the agency was simply required or merely required to, quote, consider the work done individually by each partner. So in that light, because they were only required to consider the work, GAO concluded that the statute neither mandated a specific degree of consideration for the mentor and the protege, nor prohibited the agency from limiting the experience that may be submitted by one of the members. Now, that was in the context of a mentor-protege joint venture, but it might, NITAC might take the position that reasoning lets us say that the small business prime has to have the past performance in task area 1 to be the prime, to be the lead prime on the thing. I don't know how, what they're going to do with it, but they might take that position. We're too speculative, I think, to go in any more detail, but that's how, the GAO at least rationalized the prior iteration of the joint venture reg.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That
May I
helps.
ask a quick question?
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, what's your understanding of the past performance? Do you think they're the 3 past performances for each task area, or do you think it's going to be a total of 3 for the entire submission?
I think it's going to be 3 for the entire submission, but that's based on how I read the draft.
Yeah, that's the way I read it as well, Robert. That's why I was curious about that.
Yeah. I mean, typically what we see is that when agencies separate the ideas of corporate experience from past performance, corporate experience is defining the what you did, and past performance is defining or confirming, validating how well you did it. So, when you have 10 task areas, you need a lot more corporate experience to show what you did. But, when I'm really looking for how did you manage your customer, your contract, the quality of delivery, those kind of things, then, a smaller number will usually suffice.
Okay. Hey, just one more quick one. I know you guys have received a boatload of questions here. You're going to try to answer these things, and
we're going to do our best. Yeah, we're going to do our best. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're already, as you can see, we're already at 90 minutes, and I don't know how many questions we've got. Well, what I did, Steve, I know Steve and some others who were part of our journey through STARS 3 with the 8A program will remember is I created a live spreadsheet and called it frequently asked questions, and just kind of kept updating it as we learn. So I think that's what we'll do, rather than kind of publish some kind of point in time release and then keep blasting everybody's email. I'll try and organize these questions by topic, put them in a spreadsheet, and then give everybody a link to that. And then as we kind of develop our understanding of this, everybody can kind of see the evolution of how that evolves.
Excellent. And I'd just like to thank you, Josh and Kathy. Outstanding job today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us, Jim. Appreciate it.
I have a question on past performance. The way that the draft read, it appeared that they wanted to have a past performance questionnaire as opposed to using CPARs. Do you think they'll allow CPARs to be used? I mean, considering the fact that they're trying to make their burden lighter?
Yeah, I would expect they would. Yeah, I would expect that they would. Kathy, what do you think?
Well, it's like apples and oranges, you got to have the same for everybody. If you have 2 different versions, then how do you compare? So when you say CPARs, does that mean printing out a CPARs form? What does that mean? So whatever they use, it's got to be generic across everybody, so that when they get down to the evaluation, they're not looking at 2 different things where one has a section added and another didn't. So they would have to create a form a questionnaire that kind of looked like CPARS to say use CPARS. Does that make sense?
Susan, you went back on mute there.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. When something like OASIS enabled you to do one or the other, if you didn't have a CPARS, then they gave you an option of being able to have, be able to use a questionnaire. So I was wondering if they were going to do something similar on this. The way that this one was written originally made it look like there was going to be a questionnaire that had to be part of this. But
I don't think we've heard anything that would give us any more insight at this point. I mean, I would kind of just generally think that a CPARS report would be acceptable. And even if it doesn't make the final, I would imagine that we'll get plenty of questions in that regard, and they'll probably include that in amendment, would be my anticipation. And then the questionnaire would kind of loosely mimic the CPARS report. That might be one strategy they take.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little tip too that I've realized over the years in dealing with the federal government. Many times when you're competing with others, they don't want to give you a passport. They don't want to fill out your form because you were a sub. But if you're a major sub, you don't have to go to your prime. If they refuse to answer that questionnaire, you can go directly to the federal government program manager or contract officer, and they will fill it out as a major sub. That's allowed. I had that experience with one large systems integrator who said, nope, I'm not filling that out. You're going after the opportunity, so are we. So I went to the contracting officer. They said, yep, you're a major sub. We'll fill it out.
Good. That's
I
awesome.
do want to add one last thing about the size issue with respect to like the 5-year, when the contract hits the 5-year mark.
Yeah.
That is something that the rule changed. I don't want to make a definitive statement on the exact language of the rule, just because I haven't digested it in full. But for those of you wanting to know, it does change 13 CFR 121.404. So if a JV has a member that grows to be other than small, I need to verify that before making a definitive thing. Before I make a definitive statement as to whether or not the recertification is required. But regardless, I think there's enough issues with respect to joint ventures now that folks are going to be worried about that as much as they're going to be thinking about how this impacts bidding strategy and Q&A. So I just want to put that out there before, so no one relies on that statement, because I'm not sure if I misspoke or not, because I haven't really, as I mentioned, been able to.
That's good, Josh.
So there you go.
Hi, this is John Horton from ITDC. I've got 2 quick questions. One concerning the scoring. You put up a slide that showed 10,000 points. Is 10,000 the minimum points you need to reach a threshold to be considered? Is 10,000 the maximum number of points that you can achieve?
Yeah, 10,000 is the maximum available. Assuming they drop that crazy mid-tier bonus thing for other than smalls. But 10,000 is kind of the total, the number of available points that you could achieve. Yep.
Okay, so is there an idea of what's the minimum points that you would need to get to be awarded a contract?
Well, let me tell you what. Okay. Brian Goodyear has said all along, I want A companies. And we kept saying, what do you mean A companies? Because your down select is a scoring sheet. And he said, I want companies 90% and above. And I heard in another forum recently, he said 92 to 94, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. But here's the thing. You're being evaluated. If you're small, in large, it's with everybody. But you're being evaluated within the 8A category. Or you're not evaluated across all smalls. It's just your category. And they have a certain number they want to meet. So if they can't get to the 90 or 92 or 94 or whatever they decide, they're going to have to go into the 80s or whatever. But that's why we're saying that it's so important that you bid as much as you can. Don't assume that you're going to get in if you don't, because that scoring sheet and those points are going to knock you out. So that's why the attention has to be paid there.
And to that point, Kathy, if you go back and look at what happened in OASIS, The folks who scored really high and got over 85, 90% of the available points on OASIS, the only way they did it was through teaming.
Right.
It was through teaming.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that, I think there was a question earlier about, well, if I get this task and it's repeated every year, can I bulk it all together? You know what? Here's what I feel about that. If it is true that they're going to use your write-up to validate the points, always don't ask the question, because then you might get a definite response you don't
never
want.
ask a question you don't want the answer
Just
to.
make the assumption that yes, you can, and bid it that way. Because if it's not specified in the RFP, you have the ability to determine which way you want to go, and they're validating that, your points from what you wrote. So that would just be my answer on that one.
Thank you very much. My second question very quickly is pertaining to facilities clearance. Is it a requirement for the prime or the team to have a facilities clearance just to qualify? Or is that only going to be for bidding on work that requires a facilities clearance after award?
Well, it's just a points on there. They're just giving, and
Yeah.
by the way,
Points.
It's not a go, no go. It's just points. And for smalls, it's secret. And for other than smalls, it's top secret. So it's not a requirement. You just get more points.
Perfect. And previously you said that you can use in a JV partner's facility clearance for the JV, and in a prime sub relationship, a subcontractor could have the facilities clearance. However, if the prime was going to do the majority of the work, the prime needed to have the facilities clearance. Is that correct?
So the facility clearance issue that SBA discussed in their rule was with respect to joint ventures. So this applies. So obviously under the GWAC, there's no clearance issue under the underlying contract. So I don't know how they're going to score. I haven't looked at that aspect of the RFP, but what I can say is, for when you're going after task orders that require clearance, a facility security clearance, as the SBA's rule says, basically either party to the JV can have a clearance, and that should satisfy the requirements that the JV meets the clearance, because most times the JV itself isn't a cleared entity. So
to follow that up, what if the JV the large mentor JV partner has the clearance? Do they have to have a TS clearance, or if it's a small business JV under the mentor protege, is it the small business clearance requirement?
So
that makes sense?
Yeah. So I think there's two separate issues. There's a scoring issue, which I don't know how NADTEC is going to negotiate this. But when you're bidding on procurements, the way that SBA is trying to set it up is, if the primary and vital requirements of the contract require the clearance, then the small entity has to have that clearance to bid on it. But if it's ancillary, whoever is doing that work needs to have it, right? So that'll be an issue that sort of gets duked out at the task order level, because I think folks are going to be trying to figure out, can I rely on my mentor companies or the other companies' clearance for a top secret when the lead mentor, only has a secret? This says if it's primary and vital, whatever that means, then the small business would have to have the clearance required to be eligible. So, but in terms of just pure scoring, I'm not sure what NITAC's going to do given this new rule in terms of allocating points for a small that happens to have a TS versus just a secret, right? I mean,
is there any reason that JV can't do CTAs and have subs?
So, okay, when you say CTA, you're talking about a joint venture, correct?
If you have a joint venture, I'm not saying CTA, can a joint venture have, for this NITAC scoring, include subcontractors beyond the members of the joint venture?
I haven't scrutinized the draft RFP, but what I can say is there's a protest from last year, the CAGRA partners, which was, I believe, an Oasis, and they challenged the Oasis solicitation on two fronts. A, they were upset that the solicitation limited the use of the mentor's past performance, like the number of examples. And B, they were upset that GSA was trying to prohibit joint ventures from subcontracting. So what GAO did was they denied the first argument, saying, look, the regulation 125.8E just says you got to consider the past performance. It doesn't say anything about relative weight or limiting. And B, we're going to sustain the protest because the rule in the FAR 9601 doesn't say you have to bid either a JV or a prime sub. So in light of that decision, I don't think NITAC would survive a challenge to try to limit joint ventures from also having a subcontractor. Now,
Great.
we'll see how
Thank
that
you.
plays out, but you at least have one GAO decision that sort of is favorable to that. How they try to come out in the final RFP is a different story, but just know that that's in the article that I wrote that the slide will have it. Maybe Robert will just, when he sends out the deck, maybe he'll just put a link to the article.
Thank you. This was very helpful. I really appreciate you guys doing this.
Yeah, we're glad to, Tom. Thank you for joining us. And I mean, just kind of from a notional level, a joint venture is a separate legally established company. And so there should be no limit to JV as a LLC having, for instance, having a subcontract, one or more subcontractors. So
yeah, that's what I thought. But you never know with this particular procurement.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay. Well,
Josh, this is Emily with Vision IT. Quick question for you.
Hey, Emily. Hey, Emily.
Hi. So Vision IT is a woman-owned small business and hub zone company. I saw one of your slides was looking at possible set aside in the socioeconomic areas. Is that an area that NITAC is going to be setting aside certain work share for, or?
So the way I understand the draft RFP is there's an unrestricted pool of people who are going to receive contracts. There's going to be an 8A pool of folks that receive contracts. And then there's going to be folks who are hub zone, service disabled veterans, and women-owned small businesses that are also eligible. And also just regular small businesses with, I hate to use the term regular, but just a small business without a socioeconomic designation would also fit that category. So, if you're both a hub zone and a woman-owned small business, and you qualify as small for both, then you are presumably eligible to bid on any task order that is either a woman-owned small business or a hub zone. That's the way I understand it. Now, what NITAC does in the final RFP, we'll let that be the final decision maker, but that's how I understand it as of now. Hope that answered your question. I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah.
I do. So someone did ask earlier, and I don't know if they're still on, but I will look up to see if there's an exception for women-owned small businesses. But as I mentioned earlier, the rule for joint ventures for affiliation, the exception is in 121-103H. And it says a joint venture of two or more business concerns may submit an offer as a small, so long as each concern is small under the size standard. Now, I went back and looked at the draft RFP, and it basically says the same thing. I didn't see anything in there, and I haven't found, unless this new SBA rule makes an exception to where the small businesses also need to be of the same socioeconomic category. I haven't seen that. But as far as I know, if both qualify as small under the NAICS code, whichever the lead small businesses designations are, those are going to be what the entity is eligible for. If it's a prime sub relationship, or even if it's a JV, that will be what you can go after at the task order level. So for example, if you have a hub zone and a woman-owned small business joint venture, and then one of your teaming partners is an 8A, you're not becoming eligible for 8A work because they're not the managing venture of the joint venture, right? Unless there's another rule out there that I'm unaware of, but that's how it's always been, because you're dealing with the 51% managing venture issue. That's the thing that has controlled the status. Now, I'll have to, like I said, verify, but I haven't seen anything out there that says that a non-lead, like the minority shareholder status can control as well. I just haven't seen that. So I don't think NITAC will be able to go around that rule. Unless, of course, again, in this new 222-page rule that was published, there's somehow some exception in there, but I don't recall seeing it in any of the readings that I've done over the past week or so. So I hope that answers your question without being a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Just I guess an add-on to that, or additional question. Would a small business be able to prime with not a JV, but a subprime relationship with a large business and use their performance?
Yeah, the current RFP the current RFP says that you wouldn't get you would not gain evaluation credit for corporate experience from your subcontractor. And that kind of goes to the main point that we're addressing here, that with this new SBA rule, combined with the number of task orders or the number of task areas they're asking small businesses to bid, et cetera, that NITAC's really kind of backed themselves in a corner. It's what they said. Is it going to survive, agency and legal review and make it into the final? That's what we're saying. There's at least, we have sufficient reason to believe that that's going to be a problem. And so kind of based upon that, what we're advising our client base to do is keep your teaming arrangements flexible at this point, especially as it regards joining other teams on an exclusive basis or whatever the case may be, and have as much flexibility as you can in your own teaming strategy so that when the final RFP drops, you can react appropriately. Because we understand what Brian and what NITAC say they want, but based upon everything else that's out there, they may not get what they want.
I think one thing to mention is for prime sub teaming, I don't know if you have your slides up, but if you can go to that slide, the SBA rule that became effective November 16th deals with a team of small business first tier subcontractors. You're proposing this team and you yourself don't have the experience. So then your first tier subs can be treated as your own, is what the rule reads, because it says that experience is as the experience of the prime. It's up to interpretation. And I'm not sure if SBA was thinking about it. What if part of that team of small business first tier subcontractors, you also have a mid-sized company? Can you loop that in? I'm not sure SBA would be okay with that, but that rule sets the floor here. Go back once, or go forward one slide to the prime sub. So if on the last sentence it's bold, if the capabilities of the small business prime doesn't independently demonstrate, then you can loop that in as the experience of the prime. But if they're not a small business, does that fall within the meaning of this rule? Possibly not. It's open to interpretation. But this rule says if I don't have it myself because that's the thing. The FAR says agencies should consider past performance of major subcontractors. It doesn't mandate it. So that's the problem that's faced all these small businesses, is like, I'm bidding on something and then the agency either doesn't count it or gives it like lower weight. This says if you don't have it on your own small business, we're going to allow you to use first tier subcontractors past performance as if it were yours, is the way that I'm reading it, because they use the word as, right? But what happens if you have that experience? This rule wouldn't count, but that doesn't mean the agency doesn't have discretion to go above and beyond and say, okay, even if you do have experience, if you want to bolster that with a mid-sized company, we'll allow it. Whether or not they will choose to do that is I guess probably not, but you never know. But as long as they are satisfying the confines of this rule, then you're good. They can go beyond it if they want. But if you don't have it, this rule says they've got to let it in, assuming that you fit a proposed team of small business contractors and you identify them in your proposal, they should be able to count it. Now, as I mentioned earlier to the gentleman who asked the question about joint ventures, and with the ICAGRA protest, must consider is the same language that GAO determined just meant you have to consider it. The relative weight is different. But here it says that it's got to be of the small. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. That could be a big protest point as to how this really is interpreted in practice. But seems to me that NITAC wants to rein in the use of teaming in some respects. But I think that will change at least somewhat when the final RFP comes out.
Yeah.
Well, I have to design for that, sorry. quick question. So does this regulation apply only when we form a CTA under FAR 9.601 clause 1, or does it apply for clause 2 as well?
This is for a small business, includes a proposed team of subcontractors. The prior slide is the regulation that was amended, and that's the one that applies for joint ventures. So this is a brand new rule. The other one is a revised rule, but they're very similar if you look at them.
Yeah.
The added bonus for the other rule was that they also added business systems and certifications. So it's not just past performance, experience, and capabilities, because that was the other protest, the Adventure One Apogee protest, where they were upset that the scoring regime, they couldn't meet some of the ISO certifications, and GAO said, well, you're still eligible, you just can't claim those points. So we're not going to say that the rule mandates it because it really ties to past performance and experience. And lo and behold, a year later, a brand new rule comes in with, what do you have it? Certifications and business systems, right? So it seems like SBA was paying attention to that one, at least observationally.
So when we talk about FAR 9.601 clause 1, they immediately refer to a JV regulations, but we can still form a CTA and follow those regulations, right? That's what it means.
So the two things to think about with respect to either a joint venture or a teaming agreement that is a traditional prime sub is teaming agreements between private parties. You typically don't see an agency saying what's got to be in there, right? Here, however, the agency's saying you've got to cover these things in your agreement because that's a go, no-go threshold. So if you're a prime subcontractor relationship, you still have to, whatever your normal teaming agreement, you have to still comport with what NITAC is asking for, because otherwise they're just going to do the thing that makes them have to not review an adjectival rating or evaluation, which is to ding people on the go, no-go. On the joint venture side, you still have to follow what they're saying in the solicitation, but you also have the 13 CFR to deal with, which is the requirements that a JV must meet to satisfy SBA's regulations. And then you have to deal with both. So I hope that answers the question. But this is a go, no-go factor, so you got to be careful.
I have a quick question. Is it a requirement in SP4 for a small business to be in a CTA with, let's say, a large prime pre-RFP to be awarded a subcontract after the RFP for a task order or something? I mean, do they have to be in a CTA, or really they don't have to be in a CTA for a large prime to award a sub to a small leader?
So are you saying if a large prime wins a spot on CIO SP4 on a future task order, can you be their subcontractor even though you're not named in their proposal as part of their original team?
Yes.
I would think so, but I actually I don't know if.
Yeah, there's no prohibition. There's no prohibition. If you can be a subcontractor to a GWAC prime post award of the contract.
Because they're satisfying all 10.
Yeah, it's the prime who's getting the contract award, and if they 2 years down the road want a bit of task order and they want you on their team, there's no reason that they couldn't do that.
Yeah, the reason you want to do it before and you want to do it through the proposal process is because part of your teaming agreement, you can say you have visibility into all tasks on the contract vehicle. If you wait till after award, they may say, well, you can come on for certain areas, but they're not going to give you visibility into EGOS, which is their award system, so you can see the RFP, sources sought, RFIs, because they feel like you didn't help them during the proposal process. So just be careful on that.
Got it. Thank you.
So I hope I was able to answer some of the questions. I know I had to sort of couch some of my answers with the old legal disclaimer. It depends.
You did great, Josh. Yeah, you did great, my friend. I appreciate it.
I know we're getting up on the end of time here, so I wanted to.
All right. Well, let's take a break, and we'll if you've still got our emails from especially any correspondence you've gotten from me or Kathy, you can reply back to that. I'll be getting a package out here shortly, and we'll continue the discussion, and hopefully NITAC keeps to their timing, and we can all take care of this. So thanks very much.